The Alabama sun had barely crept above the rooftops when Nia Caldwell backed her old gray SUV out of her driveway. She wasn't in uniform that morning, just a black sweatshirt, jeans, and a pair of worn-out sneakers. Her badge and sidearm were tucked into a small crossbody bag resting beside her seat. As Montgomery's police chief, she liked keeping a low profile when not on duty, especially during her early morning errands. The city was quiet at that hour. Nia grabbed a quick coffee from a family-run cafe on the east side, exchanging a few kind words with the owner before stepping back into her car. She had a council meeting in 2 hours and wanted to stop by a friend's shop on her way downtown. Merging into light traffic, she didn't notice the white cruiser that pulled in behind her. A few blocks later, flashing lights lit up her rear-view mirror. She frowned. Her turn signal had been used, her speed steady. Still, she eased the car to the curb and came to a gentle stop in front of an old hardware store. Hands resting clearly on the wheel, she checked her side mirror. A young white officer stepped out of the cruiser, walking briskly toward her vehicle, posture tight with authority that hadn't yet been earned. He didn't knock or wait. The door swung open without warning. License and registration. He snapped, his eyes already narrowing. "Good morning, officer," Nia replied, keeping her voice level. "May I ask the reason for the stop?" "I said license and registration," he repeated, louder this time, ignoring her question entirely. She reached slowly toward her bag. "I'm retrieving my identification now," she said clearly, watching. His hand hovered too closely near his holster. His expression hardened. "Stop moving so slow. Think you're being clever or something?" "I'm just following your instructions," she responded, remaining steady. But her calm only seemed to provoke him further. "You look like trouble," he muttered, stepping closer. "Out of the car. Now." She hesitated only long enough to unbuckle her seatbelt. Stepping out slowly, she faced him head-on. A few people had started watching from across the street. A man unlocking his store, a mother pushing a stroller. The officer's hand came down hard, not as a strike, but a shove that made her stumble back against the car door. "You got an attitude," he accused, smirking like he'd just put someone in their place. That moment hung in the air. Nia straightened, one hand braced on the frame of her vehicle, the other hanging by her side. A flush of heat crawled up her neck, not from anger, but from the sting of being dehumanized in plain daylight. "You just disrespected your superior," she said, not shouting, not even raising her voice. The officer blinked. "What? I'm?" "Chief Nia Caldwell, Montgomery Police Department." His face drained of color. Laughter rippled from the sidewalk where someone had started recording. "You're lying," he muttered. She calmly reached into her crossbody bag, pulled out her gold badge, and held it up so he, and the growing crowd, could see it gleam. "Not today," someone called out. A man across the street cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "She's the chief, man!" The young officer stepped back like he'd been struck. He looked around at the witnesses, then back at her, panic spreading across his features. She didn't move, didn't speak, just kept her eyes fixed on him with the quiet control of someone used to commanding entire precincts. A woman nearby pulled out her phone. "It's all on video," she said, holding the screen steady. "You picked the wrong one today," someone else added, chuckling without humor. The officer's breathing quickened. His hand twitched nervously at his side. But Nia's stare pinned him in place. "You need to call your supervisor," she said softly, but with a finality that cut through the tension like a blade. The crowd around them wasn't yelling, wasn't chanting. They didn't need to. Their presence was enough. The young officer finally reached for his radio, fumbling with the buttons as if unsure how to even request help, and Nia Caldwell stood still, her presence growing taller with every passing second, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been stopped and silenced. The air thickened with silence as the young officer fumbled his radio. Nia remained motionless, her badge still raised, her calm gaze never wavering. Her cheek throbbed where he had shoved her, but her dignity stood untouched. Around them, more people gathered, drawn by the tension hanging in the air. Phones were already filming. Conversations hushed to whispers. No one wanted to miss what came next. 2 police cruisers arrived within minutes, tires screeching softly as they pulled up. Doors flung open, and 2 officers emerged, one middle-aged, the other no older than 25. Both slowed the moment. They recognized the woman standing beside the SUV. "Chief Caldwell?" the senior officer asked, eyes wide with confusion. Nia nodded once. "This officer physically engaged me without reason during a traffic stop. I identified myself. He proceeded anyway." The rookie who had stopped her looked down at his boots. His nameplate read Reynolds. He was sweating now, the weight of the moment bearing down like gravity. The older officer glanced between them, then at the crowd with their cameras held high. His shoulders straightened. "We'll take it from here, Chief," he said carefully. Nia lowered her badge and stepped back, but didn't leave. She folded her arms across her chest, not in defiance, but in quiet resolve. She had no intention of walking away from this, not when the system she led had failed her in such a visible, humiliating way. Reynolds was separated and guided toward the second cruiser. His lips moved in frantic whispers, but his words didn't carry. One of the arriving officers, a tall woman with a sharp jawline and calm posture, approached Nia with hesitant steps. "Ma'am, are you okay?" "I was shoved and disrespected in public view," Nia answered. "My physical injuries are minor. The rest? Not so much." The officer winced at her words. "Would you like medical assistance?" "Document everything," Nia replied. "Pictures, statements, timestamps. This isn't just a misstep. It's a culture problem." The officer nodded and pulled out her notepad. Nearby, the store owner stepped forward, a burly man in a blue apron stained with paint and sawdust. He held up his phone. "Got the whole thing?" "Right here," he said. Started recording as soon as he raised his voice. "Thank you," Nia told him sincerely. "Please send that to Internal Affairs. I'll make sure someone follows up." The crowd murmured approval. A few clapped, quietly, not out of celebration but solidarity. Their presence wasn't about spectacle. It was about being seen, about standing beside someone who had, until now, always worn the badge that supposedly offered protection. Lieutenant Maria Sanchez, Nia's most trusted second-in-command, arrived moments later. Her unmarked vehicle slid into a nearby space, and she climbed out briskly, scanning the scene. When her eyes met Nia's, they flashed with alarm, then understanding. "I got the alert," Maria said. "Didn't expect to find this." Nia gave a half-shrug, one that carried the weight of every unspoken reality they'd both long understood. Maria turned toward the rookie, who was now sitting in the back seat of the cruiser, head bowed. "I knew who you were?" "Not until after he put his hands on me," Nia said. Maria's jaw tightened. "This is going to explode." "It needs to." Another woman in the crowd stepped forward, holding her toddler on one hip. Her voice shook slightly. "If they'll do that to you, what chance do the rest of us have?" Nia didn't respond. Immediately. She met the woman's eyes, then looked at the people around her. The mechanics, the parents, the store clerks, the students. All of them standing not for drama, but for justice. "You have every right to be angry," she said. "But don't walk away from this. We change it by facing it. A ripple of agreement moved through the group. Someone passed out water bottles. A teenager offered to share footage with the local news. A man muttered, "I thought we were past this," to no one in particular. City patrol supervisors arrived soon after, along with a representative from the mayor's office. The official attempted to usher Nia away from the scene, concerned about optics. She refused. "I will not be tucked away behind press statements and polished sound bites," she told him. "Let the city see the truth for once." The young official, clearly nervous, nodded and stepped aside. No more arguments followed. Reporters began appearing as word spread. A van with a local news logo parked across the street. Microphones and cameras moved in as voices rose, but Nia didn't seek attention. She stayed because it mattered. Because leadership wasn't just about issuing orders. Sometimes it meant standing still and letting people witness what accountability looked like. She remained rooted in place as the sun rose higher over Montgomery, not because she had something to prove, but because she no longer had anything to hide. The footage spread faster than anyone anticipated. By the time Nia reached the precinct later that afternoon, her inbox was overflowing, her name trending on every platform. Local blogs posted headlines calling the incident a disgrace, while civil rights groups released formal statements demanding immediate action. The mayor's office scrambled for control, but the video spoke louder than any press release ever could. Inside her office, Nia sat at her desk in silence. The blinds were half closed, casting faint shadows across the worn wood and framed commendations, lining the walls. Her badge rested on the corner of her desk, just within reach, though she hadn't picked it up once since walking in. She didn't need it to feel the weight of her position. Lieutenant Sanchez entered without knocking. Her eyes held concern, but her voice stayed steady. "Reynolds has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation," she said. "Internal Affairs has launched a full review. Media's camping outside." Nia nodded slowly. "And the mayor?" "He's waiting for a written statement. Wants to hold a joint press conference tomorrow." She didn't respond immediately. Her mind drifted to the crowd that had formed earlier, the way strangers had stepped forward without hesitation. Support had arrived without invitation. Not because she was chief, but because what happened felt personal to every bystander watching. Sanchez lowered herself into the chair across from her. "You all right?" "I'm tired," Nia admitted. Not from the shove, from what it revealed. "You've been warning them for years," Sanchez replied. "Now they can't deny it." There was a knock at the door. A young officer peeked in, his expression uneasy. "Ma'am, Channel 5's outside. They want to comment." "Tell them I'll speak tomorrow," Nia answered, "but not in a polished suit, not behind a podium." The officer hesitated, then nodded and left. Nia turned to Sanchez again. "Have the footage archived. Multiple copies. Secure evidence chain. Already done." Later that evening, Nia walked into her small kitchen, hands still tingling from the tension of the day. Her phone vibrated with new messages, some from reporters, others from people she hadn't heard from in years. One, from a retired officer in Georgia, simply read, "You showed them what dignity under pressure looks like. Thank you." She poured herself a glass of water and sat at the edge of the couch, legs crossed, television muted. The screen showed her own face, frozen mid-sentence, the words, "Police chief mistreated by her own department," in bold red beneath. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unravel. And yet, every second was hers as darkness settled. Outside, voices rose just beyond her window. Curious, she stepped onto her porch. A dozen residents stood by the sidewalk, holding candles, each flame flickering gently in the breeze. Signs hung loosely from their hands. "We stand with Chief Caldwell. Respect has no uniform. Justice starts at the top." One woman stepped forward. "We're not here to make noise," she said. "Just wanted to let you know. We see you, and we've got your back." Nia's throat tightened. She hadn't expected this. She offered a soft thank you and remained on the porch until every candle had dimmed and the people slowly dispersed into the night. The next morning brought no calm. National headlines picked up the story. Commentators debated the rookie's behavior, while others fixated on Nia's restraint. At City Hall, security buzzed as crowds gathered outside. Protesters held signs, some chanting, others praying. Still, the atmosphere remained peaceful, organized by young activists determined to turn outrage into action. Inside the council chamber, murmurs filled the room as officials prepared for the emergency hearing. Nia sat flanked by two attorneys from the city's oversight board. She wasn't there as the chief. She was a citizen offering testimony about misconduct within the very ranks she led. The room silenced when she rose. Dressed in a simple navy dress, no stars, no stripes, she stepped forward and addressed the committee. "When I put on this badge, I took an oath to protect this community," she began. "That promise does not expire when I change into civilian clothes." She paused only briefly before continuing. "What happened to me was not rare, it was common, too common. The only difference is that I carry a title that gave the public a reason to listen. But millions face similar humiliation without anyone watching." Some council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others leaned in, focused. "I'm not seeking sympathy. I'm seeking accountability. Not just for one man's actions, but for the silence that follows every time these moments are ignored." A wave of quiet agreement moved through the audience seated behind her. The mood wasn't angry. It was determined. By the time she returned to her seat, even her toughest critics had no questions. Outside, the wind carried the sound of chants from across the plaza. And for the first time in years, Nia Caldwell felt something rising around her. Not attention, not applause, but a movement. The courtroom was quiet as the final decision approached. Every seat was taken. Some stood along the walls, unwilling to miss what had become more than a local controversy. What began as a routine stop had transformed into a national moment of reckoning. At the defense table, Officer Chad Reynolds sat stiffly. His uniform had been replaced by a borrowed suit that fit poorly across his shoulders. His attorney, a high-priced legal strategist from out of town, whispered strategy, but he barely moved. His face was pale, drawn. He no longer looked like the overconfident man who had pulled over a stranger. He looked like someone discovering the limits of his own assumptions. Judge Avery Coleman, a sharp-eyed veteran of the bench, called the room to order. His voice carried weight, even when quiet. There was no need for dramatic flourishes. The evidence had already done that. Multiple videos had been shown. Eyewitnesses testified. The audio of Reynolds's disrespectful tone had echoed across the walls of the chamber. Everyone had heard it. Everyone had seen it. There was no escaping what had happened. When Chief Caldwell was called to the stand, she didn't hesitate. Her walk was steady, posture tall. She wore her uniform again, not for effect, but as a symbol of responsibility. She took the oath and spoke directly, not just to the judge but to everyone watching. "I wasn't stopped because I posed a danger," she began. "I was stopped because of a stereotype." The room listened without a sound. I've trained officers for over 20 years. I know what professionalism looks like. What I experienced that day was not a lapse in judgment. It was a failure of values. Reynolds looked away. He hadn't apologized. Not once. Not even after seeing the footage himself. Leadership is not about rank, she continued. It's about example. If we accept this behavior without consequence, we normalize it. When she stepped down, the silence lingered. It wasn't shock. It was reflection. The prosecution's closing argument was brief. The facts spoke louder than rhetoric ever could. The defense attempted to spin fear as justification, but the courtroom didn't buy it. That excuse had worn thin long ago. Judge Coleman reviewed his notes one last time before delivering the verdict. His voice was calm, but firm. Based on the evidence and testimony presented, this court finds Officer Chad Reynolds guilty of misconduct, unlawful physical contact, and abuse of authority under the color of law. A soft gasp escaped from somewhere, near the back. Reporters scribbled frantically. Cameras clicked. Reynolds sat still, blinking slowly, the reality settling in. For the first time, he appeared to grasp what had just occurred. Outside, the crowd erupted, not with cheers, but with resolve. People embraced. Strangers shared nods of respect. Signs waved higher. Children on shoulders clapped their small hands, without fully understanding, yet sensing the moment's gravity. Nia exited the courthouse without rushing. Microphones pointed her way. Flashbulbs lit up the steps. A dozen questions were thrown at once. She raised a hand and waited for quiet. "I didn't ask for this moment," she said clearly. "But I won't waste it." The reporters leaned forward. "What happened to me happens to too many people who don't have a title or a platform. Today, we sent a message. Behavior like that has no place in any badge, any department, or any community." She didn't linger. The message was enough. That night, she sat on her porch again. The stars blinked faintly above the rooftops. Her uniform hung beside the door, but she wasn't thinking about rank. She was thinking about that teenage girl holding the sign, the mechanic who shared his video, the elderly woman who pressed her palm to her heart when their eyes met. Her phone buzzed once more. It was an email from a young recruit at the academy. "Because of you, I'm staying in this program. I want to change things from the inside. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like." Nia smiled quietly and set the phone aside. Weeks passed, but the echoes of that day remained. Policies began shifting. Sensitivity training, previously optional, became mandatory. Hiring protocols were reviewed. Community engagement expanded. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. Eventually, Nia stood before a new class of recruits. The room was filled with fresh faces, hopeful and unsure. "You've chosen a path that demands more than just rules," she told them. "It demands awareness, humility, and courage when no one's watching." She paused, letting the silence speak for itself. "If you ever forget that, remember this: justice is not a destination. It's a decision, one you'll make again and again." The room stayed quiet, listening. As she left the room, a young woman in uniform followed her into the hallway. "Ma'am," she said softly, "I watched your hearing with my entire family. My little brother told me he wants to be like you when he grows up." Nia placed a hand on the officer's shoulder. "Tell him he already is. He just doesn't know it yet." Outside, the sky burned gold with the setting sun. Nia walked toward her car, the same SUV, no driver, no escort, just her, and the road ahead. But now, the journey didn't feel solitary. Across the country, people had heard her story. And maybe, just maybe, they'd carry it with them, into conversations, into classrooms, into change. She didn't need headlines. She didn't need medals. She just needed the world to keep moving forward. And she would be there, walking alongside it,